The village lay beneath the endless sky, its huts of clay and thatch clustered close together like kin forced into intimacy. From afar, it seemed peaceful, a place where smoke rose from cooking fires, children's laughter carried on the wind, and men and women moved with rhythm, tending goats, hoeing the soil, weaving baskets. But behind that surface harmony lay a harsh truth. Survival here was not gentle, it was earned through obedience. Every rule, every tradition, every command from the elders weighed on the people like a stone, and those who faltered beneath that weight were left to hunger, shame, or silence. Among these huts, on the edge of the village, lived a girl whose presence was spoken of only in whispers. She was young, still more a child than a woman, her body thin as a stalk of millet, her eyes wide with both innocence and a quiet awareness that others overlooked. Her life might have been one of laughter and shared labor, but fate had placed her beneath the hand of a stepmother whose heart seemed made of thorns. This woman ruled her household with iron cruelty, never satisfied, always suspicious of the girl's presence. To the stepmother, the girl was an intruder, a burden she had not chosen but one she would break. And the weapon she used was hunger. While other children ate steaming bowls of porridge or chewed roasted maize, the girl was given scraps, sometimes nothing at all. Her siblings ate their fill, licking their fingers, while she sat on the mat with an empty gourd in her hands, her stomach twisting like knotted rope. At night, the stepmother would leave food locked away, carrying the key around her neck, so the girl's hunger sharpened with each passing hour. Her body weakened day by day. The bones of her shoulders pushed against her skin, her cheeks hollowed, her steps grew slower as she carried water jars or bundles of firewood. Yet in that weakness something stirred. The villagers saw her stumble beneath the sun, balancing pots on her head, and they whispered that she would not last. They shook their heads, claiming she was too frail, too silent, too obedient even to fight back. What they did not see was that while her body thinned, her spirit did not break. Hunger carved her like a sculptor shaping stone, stripping away her childhood softness, sharpening her gaze until it carried an intensity that unsettled even the cruel woman who starved her. Her stepmother took satisfaction in watching the girl weaken. She saw it as proof of her power, a reminder that obedience could be enforced not only with words or blows but with the slow torture of denying life's simplest need. When the girl reached for crumbs, the stepmother slapped her hand away. When she lingered near the cooking pot, breathing in the scent of yam stew, the woman sneered and drove her outside. And yet, for all her cruelty, there were moments when she caught the girl's eyes and felt an unease she could not name. For in those eyes there was no emptiness. There was watching, waiting, and something unyielding. The girl herself did not fully understand it. She only knew that though her stomach groaned, though her hands trembled as she worked, she would not collapse before those who mocked her. She would carry the water jar, she would pound the millet, she would sweep the dust from the yard, all while the hunger gnawed at her insides. She learned to quiet the rumble of her belly with thoughts, with questions that bloomed in her mind while her body shrank. Why did the elders speak of justice yet allow cruelty in their homes? Why did the earth provide so much and yet deny it to her? Why did her stepmother's eyes burn with hatred whenever they landed upon her? In the stillness of night, when her siblings snored and the stepmother's breathing rumbled from the corner of the hut, the girl would stare at the ceiling and let her thoughts wander like rivers. She imagined herself somewhere beyond the village, where food was not given as punishment but shared freely, where children's stomachs did not ache and no one's worth was measured by obedience alone. These imaginings fed her in ways the porridge never did. Hunger left her body hollow, but it carved a space for something else to grow, an alertness, a hunger not for food alone but for meaning. So the days passed in this village of hunger and harshness, where smiles were thin, laughter often cruel, and the weight of tradition pressed heavily on all. The girl's body weakened under her stepmother's cruelty, but her spirit grew sharper, harder, like a blade hidden in plain sight. She did not yet know what lay ahead, nor how her suffering would shape her fate. But already, in her silence, in her endurance, in the fierce glow of her eyes, the beginnings of power stirred, waiting for the moment to rise. Morning always began with the rattle of pots and the crackle of firewood, smells of millet porridge and roasted maize drifting through the hut. The girl would wake to the scent, her stomach already aching, only to watch as her stepmother carefully ladled food into bowls for the others. Her stepbrothers and stepsisters sat cross-legged, slurping greedily, their mouths slick with oil and their laughter filling the space. She was made to sit apart, sometimes holding an empty calabash, sometimes given only a handful of stale crumbs pressed into her palm as though it were a gift. Her stepmother never allowed her to taste enough to quiet her hunger, only enough to remind her of what she was missing. When the others finished, she was sent out into the blazing sun, a water jar balanced on her thin frame. The path to the river wound through sand and thorny shrubs, and her bare feet stung with every step. Her hands trembled against the weight of the clay pot, her arms quivered, and still she pressed forward. Hunger made her dizzy, the world swayed around her like grass in the wind. She would often stop, pressing her palm against a tree for support, afraid her knees would give way. Yet the memory of her stepmother's scorn, the sharpness of her tongue, and the threat of punishment drove her to keep walking. By the time she returned, dripping with sweat and dust, the house would smell again of food, thick yam stew simmering, groundnuts roasted in a pan. The girl's mouth watered, her lips dry and cracked, but she dared not approach. Instead, she was ordered to pound millet in the mortar, the heavy pestle almost too much for her frail arms. Each strike sent pain up her shoulders. Blisters grew on her palms, skin breaking open until her hands stung with every movement. She worked in silence, though every sound of chewing and every smacking lip from her siblings pierced her heart. At midday, when the sun burned hottest, her stepmother sometimes placed a small bowl before her, not filled with porridge or stew, but with water mixed with a few grains left at the bottom. The woman's eyes would gleam with cruelty as she said, "Eat if you can call this food. Perhaps the gods will fatten you with pity." The girl would lower her head, swallowing the bitter mixture, her body longing for more, her spirit forced to endure the humiliation. The others laughed, pointing at her trembling hands as she lifted the bowl to her lips, mocking her for the way she drank as though every drop were gold. Evening brought no relief. She was sent to gather firewood while the others sat by the hearth, gnawing on roasted plantains. The smoke filled her nose, her belly twisted, and her legs felt like hollow sticks. By the time she returned, the stepmother had hidden away the leftovers, locking them in a gourd. The girl was left with nothing but the ache in her belly, a punishment that stretched into the night. In bed, her body curled upon itself as if to protect what little strength remained. Her ribs pressed against her skin, her breath shallow. She listened to the snores of her siblings, their full stomachs rising and falling in contentment, while her own stomach groaned like a restless drum. The hunger never let her sleep easily. It clawed at her insides, woke her before dawn, and followed her like a shadow wherever she went. Her stepmother called this discipline. To the girl it was survival. Every trembling step, every faint moment where the world seemed to dim around her, was a test she endured in silence. She ate little, but her mind recorded everything: the cruelty of being denied, the taste of scraps, the sharpness of mockery. She grew thinner with each passing week, but though her body faltered, her will did not. In the quiet corners of her hunger, something stronger than food began to form. The village was not blind to her suffering, but blindness would have been kinder. Instead, they saw her hollow cheeks, the thinness of her arms, the way her knees buckled when she carried water or bent to sweep the compound, and they laughed. Children followed her in groups, throwing pebbles and chanting cruel songs, their small voices sharp with mockery. "Look at her bones," they cried, "a broomstick could carry more than she can." They mimicked her slow walk, clutching their bellies in exaggerated weakness until they toppled over in feigned collapse. The girl's face burned with shame, but she said nothing. To respond would only bring more taunts, and so she let the insults pass like stones bouncing off a wall she built within herself. Her stepmother encouraged this cruelty, fueling it with her own tongue. At the well, where women gathered each morning, the stepmother would stand tall, her arms crossed, and laugh loudly as she spoke of her stepdaughter. "She is useless," she declared, "a body that eats air and returns no strength. If she carries a pot, it cracks. If she sweeps a yard, the dust remains. If she pounds grain, she wastes it. Even the goats look stronger than her." The other women, eager to remain in the good graces of one so quick with her tongue, chuckled and nodded, whispering to each other about how the girl's mother must have been weak as well. Their gossip traveled like fire through dry grass, and soon the entire village seemed to know her as nothing more than a fragile shadow, an example of failure. During evening gatherings around the fire, when stories were told and laughter rose like smoke, the stepmother made the girl's thinness into entertainment. She would hold out her arm, pointing at the girl's frail body, and say, "See how the moon shines through her ribs?" If she turned sideways, she would vanish into the night. Laughter erupted, cruel and sharp, and though some faces softened with pity, no one dared to defend her. The girl sat quietly at the edge of the circle, her eyes lowered, her hands folded tightly in her lap as though gripping her dignity before it, too, could be snatched away. Even her siblings, who once played with her when they were younger, now joined in the mockery. They exaggerated her careful steps, imitating the way she sometimes stumbled when her hunger grew too strong. They pulled at their own cheeks, flattening them, and called her hollow face. At mealtimes, when they received steaming bowls of porridge, they pretended to hide theirs under their arms, saying, "Be careful, or she will steal our food with her hungry eyes." Their laughter stung more than the hunger itself. The cruelty extended beyond words. On days when her stepmother was feeling particularly harsh, she would order the girl to eat outside in the dust while the rest of the family sat under the shade of the hut. But often there was nothing for her to eat at all. When the girl tried to rest, her stepmother would rouse her again, sending her to fetch water or gather firewood, tasks that drained what little strength she still possessed. "Work will make you stronger," the woman sneered, though in truth she knew the girl's exhaustion was part of her punishment. The villagers took their cue from the stepmother. Passing by as the girl bent to sweep or haul heavy bundles, they shook their heads and muttered, "What a waste of breath." Even the ancestors would not bless a child so weak. Some laughed openly, clapping their hands at the sight of her struggling, as if her suffering were a kind of performance staged for their amusement. To them, she was not a child enduring cruelty but a lesson to others, a warning carved into living flesh. Disobedience, weakness, or misfortune would earn only ridicule, not compassion. The girl endured all this in silence. Words rose in her throat sometimes, defenses, protests, even anger, but she swallowed them down, knowing that to speak would invite harsher punishment. Instead, she allowed her silence to become a shield. When they mocked her, she did not answer. When they laughed at her trembling hands, she pressed them more firmly against the pestle and continued her work. When they called her hollow and weak, she carried her water jar without complaint, her steps slow but steady. Each insult struck her, but none broke her. Her silence became armor, her endurance a kind of defiance no one recognized. Yet beneath that armor, pain lived like a constant ember. Alone at night, when the compound was quiet and only the insects sang, tears slid silently down her face. She touched her ribs, felt their sharpness, and wondered if she would vanish one day, as the villagers said, turning into nothing more than dust carried by the wind. She wondered if anyone would remember her, or if her life would be only a tale told in laughter around a fire. But even in those moments of despair, something stirred within her. She began to realize that while her stepmother starved her body, she could not starve her mind. Her silence, her watchfulness, her refusal to collapse before their eyes, all of these were seeds of something greater, though she did not yet know what it was. So the mockery continued, day after day, each laugh and insult pressing down on her like stones piling on her back. Yet the girl bore them all, her silence not weakness but a quiet strength, a shield no one could strip away. In the emptiness of her stomach, in the hollow spaces carved by hunger and humiliation, a space was opening, a space where resilience was taking root, waiting for its time to grow. The night had fallen heavy upon the village, cloaking the earth in shadows that seemed to press down on her as much as her hunger did. The girl's body was frail, trembling from days of meager scraps, but her spirit would not allow her to collapse in front of those who mocked her. She endured the humiliation silently, but that night the weight of emptiness felt unbearable. Her stepmother had once again denied her food, handing her only the remains of cold porridge smeared on the bottom of a calabash, and even those had been snatched away by a stray dog before she could lick the bowl clean. Her stomach twisted in painful knots, but worse than the ache was the knowledge that this cruelty was not accidental, it was designed to break her completely. She stumbled away from the compound, her feet dragging along the dirt path, her breath shallow as though even the air refused to nourish her. Each step felt like defiance and yet also surrender, for she had no clear destination in mind. All she wanted was a place where no one's eyes would burn her with scorn, where no laughter would follow her bent back or trembling hands. The moon was thin, a silver sickle in the sky, and under its pale light she walked past the clustered huts, past the edge of the village, until she found herself standing before a grove of trees. The grove was known among villagers as a place where children dared not play, for it was said that spirits lingered there, restless and watchful. An old hut stood near the grove, its thatch roof partly collapsed, walls leaning with age, windows hollow like empty sockets. No one had lived there for years. Some whispered it once belonged to a healer who had been accused of practicing forbidden arts, driven out before her knowledge could be passed down. Others said the hut had always been haunted, a place where silence carried voices and shadows twisted into shapes unseen elsewhere. But for the girl, it was simply a refuge, a place away from mocking eyes, away from the cruelty of her stepmother's voice, away from the clattering bowls of food she was never allowed to taste. She stepped inside cautiously, her bare feet brushing against dust and dry leaves. The air was cool, heavy, and strangely still. In the broken hut, she sank to her knees, her body folding with the weight of exhaustion. Her stomach groaned, but she pressed her hands against it as if to silence the noise. For a moment she let the stillness swallow her whole, and then she whispered into the darkness, not knowing to whom she spoke. "If I must starve," she murmured, her voice hoarse, "then let my mind not starve with me. If my body is weak, let me at least keep my spirit strong." Her words lingered, carried into the hollow air, and to her astonishment, something seemed to answer. It began faintly, a rustling that was not the wind, a tremor that was not her imagination. At first she thought it was the sound of her own stomach echoing in her ears, but soon she realized the whispers came from the walls themselves, from the earth beneath the hut, from the grove outside. She froze, breath caught in her chest, but the whispers grew clearer, weaving around her like threads of unseen cloth. They spoke not in one voice but in many, low, layered, shifting like the murmur of a crowd. The girl strained to listen, and though the words were strange, fragmented, she began to understand them. They spoke of knowledge buried and forgotten, of secrets too dangerous to be spoken in daylight. They told of herbs that could heal and herbs that could poison, of chants that could call storms or silence them, of patterns in the stars that foretold the fate of villages. They spoke of the mind as a flame that no hunger could extinguish, if only one learned to feed it differently. Fear coursed through her, but with it came wonder. She closed her eyes and allowed the whispers to seep into her, to fill the emptiness her stepmother's cruelty had carved. The hunger in her belly remained, sharp and gnawing, but her mind felt suddenly alive, as though it were being fed by something unseen. She clung to each fragment, each revelation, treasuring them as though they were morsels of bread. In the shadows of the hut, she learned that starvation was not only a weapon but also a passage, a stripping away of the body's comfort that left the mind raw and ready to receive what others could not bear. She realized that while her stepmother believed hunger was breaking her, it was instead sharpening her, carving her spirit into something unyielding. The whispers grew bolder, as though they recognized her willingness to listen. They told her that power did not always come from strength of body or fullness of belly but from knowledge hidden from ordinary eyes. They urged her to endure, to gather each secret carefully, to store them within her as one would store grain for a long famine. She opened her eyes and looked around the ruined hut, suddenly seeing it differently. The walls, though broken, seemed alive with markings, faint carvings, almost invisible in the dark, that hinted at old knowledge. The grove outside rustled softly, and she realized the voices were not confined to the hut. They surrounded her, waiting for her return, ready to reveal more if she dared to seek. That night, she did not weep though her body trembled with weakness. Instead, she leaned against the crooked wall and whispered back to the unseen voices, asking them to teach her, to keep her company in the nights of hunger, to turn her emptiness into strength. And in the silence that followed, she felt something shift within herself. Her body was frail, but her mind was no longer hollow. Her stepmother could starve her stomach, but she could not starve the secrets she now carried, nor the fire that had been lit in her heart by the voices of the forgotten. The girl sat in the broken hut, her body frail and shaking, but her eyes wide with a light that had not been there before. The whispers had not vanished with the passing of the night. They lingered, curling around her ears like smoke, seeping into her thoughts like rain into dry earth. They were not simply sounds anymore. They had become a presence, a gathering of something older than the village itself, something rooted in the soil and stars, something that carried the weight of generations. She knew instinctively these were not ordinary voices. They were spirits, ancestors, fragments of lives long gone yet refusing to be silenced. They had found her because she had been stripped bare, left with nothing, and in that emptiness she had become a vessel ready to be filled. They spoke of strength, but not the kind her stepmother worshipped, not the strength of full bellies and fattened bodies. They spoke of a strength that grew in silence, the kind that endured mockery without shattering, the kind that bore hunger without surrendering its spirit. They told her that true power was not measured in how loudly one commanded or how much one consumed, but in how much one could endure without breaking. The river, one whisper said low and steady, wears down the stone not with force but with patience. Another voice added, a stomach may empty, but a mind fed with secrets cannot be hollow. The girl listened, and every word filled her like a seed planted deep within her hunger. Her stomach gnawed at her with sharp teeth, but she no longer wept for food. Instead, she imagined her hunger as a fire, and the voices fed it with what she could not see, stories, wisdom, truths about the world. They told her of balance, of how every cruelty carried its shadow, and how those who starved others only planted famine in their own fate. They spoke of unseen power, the kind that waited in silence until the moment it was called. The body is a vessel, one voice murmured, but the vessel can be emptied. The spirit is the flame within, and the flame cannot be starved if it learns to feed on what others cannot touch. She pressed her hands to her belly, and though it was hollow, her mind felt full. She could feel herself growing, not in flesh but in depth, in clarity, in the strange strength that cannot be measured by the eyes of villagers. The whispers taught her to see differently. When she looked at the moon through the broken thatch, she did not only see light. She saw a rhythm, a reminder that darkness and light chase one another endlessly, each giving way to the other. Balance, they said. The world itself is balance. To starve you is to unbalance the scale, and balance always returns. The hunger you suffer will weigh on those who caused it. The girl understood then that her suffering was not meaningless, not wasted. It was shaping her, sharpening her, preparing her for something far greater than her stepmother's small cruelty. She realized she was not merely surviving, she was being taught, molded, transformed by forces unseen. They told her of power hidden in silence. The loud are often the weakest, they whispered. The one who endures quietly holds storms within her. They spoke of the importance of listening, of how those who listen can hear the truths the loud miss. A hungry stomach makes the ears sharper, they said, and in emptiness the spirit becomes vast. The girl realized that while the others in her village filled their mouths with food and laughter, they closed their minds. But she, starved and silenced, had been open to something they could not imagine. Her emptiness was her doorway, and through it knowledge entered freely. The voices also spoke of secrets no ordinary child would know. They described the patterns of wind, how it carried not only dust but messages if one learned to read its dance. They told her of the trees, how roots communicated beneath the earth, how the living were bound by threads unseen. They revealed that suffering was not always punishment, but sometimes initiation. You are being tempered, they said, like iron in the fire. Hunger is your forge. One day, you will rise with a strength that cannot be taken away. The girl's eyes glowed as she listened, her lips slightly parted, not because she longed for food, but because she could feel her mind devouring these truths, swallowing them whole, storing them like precious grain hidden in a secret granary. Her stepmother had thought she was breaking her, but instead she was being remade. In the silence of the hut, the girl learned that power is often born in places of weakness, that emptiness itself can be a blessing when it opens the door to hidden strength. She realized that while others feared the grove, she had found a sanctuary, a place where the ancestors whispered what they would never reveal to the proud or the cruel. She was chosen not in spite of her suffering but because of it. Hunger had made her spirit receptive, her pain had made her heart humble, and together they had carved space for wisdom to enter. By the time dawn brushed the edges of the sky, her body was still frail, her stomach still empty, but she no longer felt like a starving child. She felt like a vessel brimming with secrets. She rose slowly, her legs unsteady, but her gaze steady and sharp. She touched the crumbling wall of the hut in gratitude, for it had given her not food, but something far more enduring. The whispers faded into silence as the sun rose, but she knew they were not gone. They had taken root within her, and now she carried them wherever she went. As she walked back to the village, her stepmother might see only weakness in her sunken cheeks and trembling hands. But within, the girl was feasting still, fed by voices of strength, balance, and unseen power that no one could take away. The stepmother, sensing that her punishments had not broken the girl, decided to push her further. She had starved her before, but now she withheld food for days at a time, watching with cruel delight as the child's body weakened. She assigned her heavier tasks, making her fetch water from the farthest river while the sun burned fiercely on her thin shoulders. She forced her to pound grain until her arms trembled, or gather wood until her back bent under the load. Whenever the girl faltered, the stepmother's laughter rang out, sharp and mocking, echoing through the compound like a whip. "Look at her," she sneered to the other women. "Even the wind could blow her away, yet she still dares to walk as if she is someone." The others chuckled, and the girl bore the ridicule in silence, her lips pressed tightly together, her eyes lowered so no one would see the light beginning to kindle in them. Hunger gnawed at her constantly. Her stomach shrank, her ribs pressed against her skin, and her steps sometimes wavered as though her legs might give way beneath her. The stepmother took pleasure in watching her collapse in the evenings, too weak to rise, only to force her up again before sunrise. But though her body weakened, something else within her sharpened. Her gaze grew clearer, her mind steadier. Each cruel test seemed to awaken a deeper calm in her, as if the voices she had heard in the sacred place whispered still, reminding her that every act of cruelty was also a lesson, every denial a gift hidden in pain. She no longer cried when she was denied food. She no longer begged when her stepmother pushed her to the ground or mocked her in front of others. Instead, she bore it with a strange stillness that unsettled those who watched closely. Villagers began to notice. Her body is thin, some murmured, but look at her eyes, they shine like fire. Others laughed it off, saying hunger had made her mad. But those who dared to meet her gaze for too long felt something stir in their hearts, something they could not name. The stepmother, however, only grew harsher. She believed that if she pressed harder the girl would finally break. So she devised crueler games. She would place a bowl of food in front of her, steaming and fragrant, only to snatch it away and give it to her own children. She would mockingly scatter grains of millet on the ground and order the girl to pick them one by one, like a bird. She would stand before others and boast of how well she kept discipline in her house, pointing to the girl as proof of her authority. "See how small she has become," she said, "see how her bones stick out, this is what comes to those who defy me." But the girl did not defy her with words. Her defiance grew silently like roots spreading underground. Though her stepmother thought she was shrinking, she was in fact expanding within, her spirit growing vast with every cruelty endured. Each task she performed with trembling hands became a meditation, each insult became fuel, each pang of hunger became a reminder that the body could be starved, but the mind could not. She carried water with steadier steps than before, her arms thin but her movements deliberate. She pounded grain with a rhythm that seemed almost unearthly, as though each strike of the pestle carried a hidden strength. Even in her faintness, her eyes glowed brighter than those of the well-fed children who laughed at her. She had learned to feed on something her stepmother could not touch, the secrets that had taken root within her. By the time her stepmother thought she had broken her, the girl was already beyond breaking. Her silence was no longer submission but mastery, her weakness no longer weakness but a cloak that hid her growing power. The stepmother, blind in her pride, did not see it. She saw only bones and frailty, and so she laughed louder, confident she had won. But the girl knew the truth. Every cruel test was sharpening her spirit like a blade, and soon the one who thought herself strong would discover how powerless she truly was. The festival of plenty came once a year, and when it arrived the entire village swelled with celebration. 4 weeks beforehand, the men had hunted in the forests, returning with antelope, bush pigs and wild fowl. The women had harvested yams, millet and maize, filling baskets until they overflowed. Pots of palm wine were prepared, jars of honey mixed with sweet water, and gourds of thick milk set aside for feasting. The air itself seemed rich with the scent of abundance as smoke curled from dozens of hearths, carrying the aroma of roasted meat and spiced stews across the land. Children ran excitedly through the village paths, their bellies already round from stolen morsels, their laughter rising into the sky like birdsong. The drummers began their rhythms even before the sun touched the horizon, announcing that a night of revelry had come. For most it was the happiest day of the year. But for the girl, it was a crueler torment than all the days of starvation that came before. While others dressed in their finest wrappers and beaded ornaments, her stepmother clothed her in rags and sent her to fetch water for the cooking. While others shared mouthfuls of freshly cooked meat before the feast began, she was ordered to fan the fire until her face stung with heat, her stomach aching from the smell of food she would not be allowed to taste. The stepmother kept her close that day, not out of care but out of malice, ensuring that the girl carried heavy trays, poured palm wine into the cups of guests, and bent low to serve food without ever daring to touch it herself. "Serve quickly, useless one," the stepmother barked as she carried steaming bowls of yam stew. "And do not let a single drop spill. Even hungry dogs know how to carry scraps better than you." Her laughter, sharp as a blade, cut through the hum of celebration, and the villagers, amused, joined in the ridicule. They delighted in the sight of her thin arms trembling under the weight of full bowls, her hollow cheeks flushed with shame, her eyes lowered as she placed food before those who had mocked her since childhood. But though her body was empty, she moved with a strange grace. Her steps, though shaky, were deliberate, her gaze when it rose was steady, and something about her bearing unsettled the villagers even as they laughed. When she poured wine into the cups, the men paused for a heartbeat longer than usual, their eyes flicking to hers as though caught by something they could not name. When she set trays before the women, some felt a sudden chill despite the heat of the fires, as if her silence carried more weight than their words. Even the children, who normally mocked her the loudest, grew uneasy when she passed, her presence too still, too composed for one who was supposed to be broken by hunger. The feast continued. Drums thundered, dancers spun, laughter rolled like waves, and the smell of roasted meat grew thick in the air. The stepmother sat among the honored women, her belly full, her face gleaming with palm oil as she boasted of her household. "See how I keep discipline," she declared loudly to those around her. "This one is lazy and weak, but under my hand she has learned to obey. Hunger has tamed her." The villagers nodded and chuckled, glancing at the girl who stood silently behind her, a jug of wine balanced on her frail arm. To them she looked like the perfect example of submission, a child reduced to nothing but service. Yet beneath her silence burned something no one could name. Her mind, fed on the secrets of the hidden place, carried a fire that her body's emptiness could not extinguish. Each bowl she carried, each jug she poured, each tray she laid before others became an act of quiet defiance. She did not shrink inside as her stepmother believed. She grew. With every insult hurled at her, with every plate of food she served without tasting, her spirit rose taller, her eyes clearer, her presence heavier, as though the very air around her thickened. Those who laughed longest were the first to grow uneasy, their voices faltering when they met her gaze. As the night deepened and the fires roared higher, the contrast became undeniable. Around her, bellies grew round, mouths dripped with grease, laughter slurred from too much wine. The villagers, gorged on abundance, began to stagger and boast, their faces shining with excess. But the girl, though she had eaten nothing, carried herself with a strange lightness, as if hunger had made her untouchable. Her hollow body seemed to glow faintly in the firelight, her eyes sharp like stars in the night sky. Some whispered among themselves that she looked like the spirits one might glimpse in dreams, too still, too radiant for a starving child. The drummers played faster, the dancers leapt higher, and the night pulsed with revelry, yet beneath it all, an unease spread like a hidden current. It was as though the girl's silence called to something deeper in their hearts, something they could not drown with meat or wine. They had mocked her for years, but tonight her presence unsettled them, reminding them of something beyond feasts and laughter, something that could not be filled by food alone. The stepmother, however, did not see it. Her pride swelled as she watched the girl serve tirelessly, convinced that she had broken her completely. "Look at her," she sneered again, raising her voice so all could hear. "A hollow stomach makes a humble child. Hunger has taught her her place." The villagers laughed, though less heartily than before, some shifting uneasily, some glancing again at the girl. And there she stood, thin as a shadow, silent as a stone, yet burning with a hidden fire. The festival of plenty raged around her, but she had no need for food or drink. Her spirit was full in ways none of them could comprehend, and though she said nothing, though she bore her stepmother's cruelty without protest, the night was already turning toward her, and the village, though they did not yet know it, would never forget the fire in her eyes. The night swelled with sound and movement as the festival reached its height. Drums thundered so hard the earth itself seemed to tremble beneath the villagers' feet. Firelight leapt high into the sky, illuminating painted faces and bodies glistening with sweat as dancers spun and stamped in wild rhythm. The air reeked of roasted meat, palm wine, and smoke. Laughter poured out in waves, coarse and loud, until it seemed that joy itself had overtaken the village. Yet at the center of it all, standing still as a shadow in the fire's glow, was the girl, her arms weary from carrying trays, her lips parched from serving wine, her stomach empty, yet her eyes shining with an intensity that made even the flames seem weak beside them. The stepmother, drunk on food and power, called her forward once more, demanding she pour wine before the elders. The girl obeyed, her movements quiet and deliberate. But when she set the gourd down, she did not bow or retreat. She stood, small and thin but unyielding, her eyes fixed not on her stepmother but on the crowd itself. For the first time she raised her voice. It was not loud, not angry, but steady, a voice sharpened by silence, carrying through the festival as though the night itself leaned in to listen. "You eat," she said, her tone calm yet piercing, "but you do not see. You drink but you do not know what you swallow. Your mouths are full, yet your hearts are empty." The laughter faltered. The drummers slowed, confusion spreading like smoke in the wind. Some turned their heads, frowning, unsettled by the audacity of the girl to speak during the feast. The stepmother barked out a laugh, sharp and dismissive. "Hunger has made her foolish," she sneered. "Pay her no mind. She is nothing but bones and silence." But even as she spoke, the girl's gaze swept across the villagers, and they found themselves unable to look away. Her words poured out, not rehearsed, not learned, but flowing as though they came from a place beyond her. She spoke of secrets buried in the soil, of the voices of ancestors who whispered in the rustle of leaves, of truths hidden in the flow of rivers and the flicker of fire. She told them things no child could know, of disputes they had tried to hide, of betrayals whispered in dark corners, of fears that had gnawed at their hearts in silence. One man dropped his calabash of wine, his face pale, for she named aloud the lie he had told to cheat his neighbor. A woman clutched her necklace tightly when the girl spoke of the night she had gone secretly to the shrine to curse another. Everywhere eyes widened, mouths grew dry and laughter died. The stepmother tried to shout her down, but her voice cracked against the steady current of the girl's words. For as the girl spoke, the air seemed to change. The flames in the hearths flared higher, casting strange shapes against the walls of the huts. The drums, left untouched, echoed once more with faint rhythms, as if unseen hands struck them in agreement with her voice. A wind rose from nowhere, cool and sharp, cutting through the heavy heat of the feast. Children whimpered and clung to their mothers. Men shifted uneasily, their pride trembling under the weight of her gaze. Then came the moment that none could deny. The ground itself shuddered, a low vibration that rattled the calabashes and made the yam pots tremble. The villagers gasped, looking to one another in fear. And at the heart of it all stood the girl, frail in body but towering in presence. Her voice no longer merely human but filled with something vast, something ancient. She spoke not just to them but through them, and the power of her words made the night itself bend. "You starve the innocent," she said, her eyes fixed on her stepmother, "and you mock the weak. But you forget, what is denied to the body feeds the spirit. You tried to break me, yet I am unbroken. You tried to empty me, yet I am full." Her stepmother recoiled as though struck, her face twisting in disbelief and rage. She tried to laugh again, to dismiss the words as madness, but her voice failed. The girl's eyes blazed in the firelight, and when she lifted her hands, the flames bent with her, flaring higher and leaning toward the crowd as though pulled by her will. Panic rippled through the villagers. Some fell to their knees, crying out prayers. Others clutched their children close, whispering frantically. But amidst the chaos, the girl's presence did not falter. Thin, hungry, trembling from exhaustion, she radiated a power that dwarfed the fullness of their bellies and the abundance of their feast. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the trembling stilled. The wind quieted. The flames returned to their normal shape. The girl lowered her hands and fell silent. The air remained heavy, charged, as if the earth itself still listened. No one dared speak. The feast lay forgotten, the food untouched, the laughter dead. All eyes rested on the girl who had been nothing but a shadow among them, now revealed as something far greater. Her stepmother's lips moved, but no sound came out. For the first time she looked at the child not with scorn but with fear. And the villagers, who had mocked her hunger, now stared with awe, their bellies unsettled by the truth that a starved body could hold a spirit too powerful to deny. The girl turned away from them, her silence louder than any words, and in that moment the balance of the night shifted forever. The festival ground lay in uneasy silence, though the fire still burned and the smell of roasted meat hung thick in the air. The villagers sat frozen, their laughter stolen, their eyes fixed upon the girl who had spoken truths no one dared to utter. And there, at the edge of the firelight, the stepmother trembled. She, who had strutted through the village with authority, who had mocked and ordered and sneered, now found her own breath ragged in her chest. Her eyes darted from the faces of the villagers to the girl standing so calmly, her thin body wrapped in the glow of power that was not of this world. "No," the stepmother cried, her voice cracking like a dry branch. "She is a liar. She is mad with hunger. Do not listen to her." She turned desperately to the elders, her hands flailing. "Have you all forgotten who she is? She is nothing, just a mouth I chose not to feed, a burden I tried to contain." Her words tumbled out frantically, but the more she spoke, the less they held weight. The villagers, once quick to laugh at her commands, now stared with cold eyes, their silence heavier than judgment itself. The girl said nothing, but her silence was like a mirror, reflecting every cruelty her stepmother had committed. The memory of those cruelties rose unbidden in the villagers' minds. The countless times the woman had withheld food, the sharp words she had flung like stones, the sneer on her lips as she watched the girl sweep and toil without reward. They remembered how she forced the child to carry heavy gourds while her own hands remained clean, how she would laugh as the girl's stomach growled in public, how she would hum songs while eating to torment the one she starved. These memories had once seemed like small cruelties easy to dismiss, but now, in the wake of the girl's revelation, they loomed monstrous. The stepmother tried to laugh, but the sound faltered, brittle and hollow. "Do you not see?" she insisted. "This is a trick, a witch's deceit. She has cursed the air to bend to her words." But even as she spoke, she felt the weakness of her own claim. For was it not her who had cursed? Was it not her whose envy had poisoned the household, whose bitterness had rotted her heart until nothing sweet remained? The eldest elder stood slowly, his staff striking the earth for silence. His eyes, sharp despite his years, fixed on the stepmother. The child's words carried the weight of truth, he said. Not the truth of trickery but the truth of revelation. And if your heart quakes at her voice, it is because your own deeds rise against you. The crowd murmured in agreement. The stepmother's face twisted, her lips trembling as though to deny it, but no denial would come. The girl's power had drawn into the open every thread of her malice, weaving them into a shroud she could not tear away. Jealousy had driven her, jealousy of a child whose quiet presence seemed to outshine her spite. She had thought that by starving the girl she could starve her spirit as well. She had imagined that by forcing her into silence, she would erase her altogether. But what she had starved was not flesh alone, it was flesh transformed into fire, silence transformed into voice. And now, standing under the gaze of all, she saw how her cruelty had not weakened the girl but sharpened her into something radiant. The weight of it settled upon her shoulders like a millstone. Her chest tightened. Sweat glistened on her brow though the night air had cooled. Her hands shook, reaching out as though for support, but no one moved to catch her. Those who once laughed at her jokes now recoiled, unwilling to be touched by the same hands that had denied another food. "You," she whispered toward the girl, her eyes wide and desperate. "What are you? What have you done to me?" But the girl did not answer. She only looked at her stepmother with calm, unflinching eyes, a gaze that held no hatred, only the steady truth that needed no words. That silence crushed the